All right. Good evening, everyone. Tonight we're going to be reading through chapter 33 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. And if this is your first time watching one of these videos, we're not just going to read the words. We're going to stop and talk about interesting vocabulary as we progress, or interesting phrases that I think probably you don't know. So if you are watching this live with me, then I encourage you to ask questions in the comments. If there's something that maybe isn't clear to you, if there's a word that isn't clear to you or a phrase that you don't understand, I definitely want you to ask. If you don't ask questions, I will just stop sometimes and explain words that I think could be important for you or useful to you in your daily life, or expressions that could be useful for you, or things I think you don't understand. All right, well, let's get started with chapter 33 of David Copperfield. The title of this chapter is Blissful, and bliss means extreme happiness. So blissful, that means very, very happy, extremely happy. All this time I had gone on loving Dora, harder than ever. Her idea was my refuge in disappointment and distress, and made some amends to me even for the loss of my friend. The more I pitied myself or pitied others, the more I sought for consolation in the image of Dora. The greater the accumulation of deceit and trouble in the world, the brighter and purer shone the star of Dora high above the world. I don't think I had any definite idea where Dora came from, or in what degree she was related to a higher order of beings, but I am quite sure I should have scouted the notion of her being simply human, like any other young lady, with indignation and contempt. All right, so Davy is saying that even when things are very difficult, all he has to do is think of Dora, and he seems very happy, or he becomes very happy. If I may say so, if I may express it, I was steeped in Dora. Let's take a look at that word, to be steeped. You know, if you're making tea, you put your tea bag in the hot water and then you steep it. You let it sit there and let all the water absorb the tea. Let's see what the official definition is. To soak food or tea. So when you steep something, you're surrounded by it. You're filled with it. So when he says, I was steeped in Dora, that means it's all he ever thought about was Dora. I was not merely over head and ears in love with her, but I was saturated through and through. Enough love might have been wrung out of me. To wring something, not R-I-N-G, but W-R-I-N-G, is when something is wet and you do this to make the water go away. That's wringing clothes. Ring, ring, wrung. So it's the same as R-I-N-G, but it's with a W, and it means to do this to make the water go away. Here, how did he use it here? I was not merely head and ears in love with her, but I was saturated through and through. Even love might have been wrung out of me, metaphorically speaking, to drown any body in. So he's saying, if you did this to me, I was so full of love for her. If you did this to me like you were doing to wet clothes, so much love would come out that someone could be drowned in it. To drown is when you go into water or some kind of liquid and you die because you go under and you stay under and then you drown. So if you wrung me, so much love would come out, you would drown in it. And yet there would have remained enough within me and all over me to pervade my entire existence. The first thing I did, on my own account, when I came back, was to take a night walk to Norwood. To do something on your own account means to do something without someone asking you to do. So when he returned to London, he had a lot of things to do for Mr. Peggotty and Peggotty. So he was busy doing things they wanted. But the first thing that he wanted to do was to walk to Norwood. The first thing he did of his own account was walk to Norwood. And like the subject of a venerable riddle from my childhood, to go round and round the house, without ever touching the house, thinking about Dora. I believe the theme of this incomprehensible conundrum was the moon. No matter what it was, I, the moonstruck slave of Dora, perambulated round and round the house and garden for 2 hours, looking through crevices in the palings, getting my chin by dint of violent exertion above the rusty nails on the top. So he's going like this, trying to see Dora. Blowing kisses at the lights in the windows and romantically calling on the night. At intervals, to shield my Dora. I don't exactly know what from. I suppose from fire, perhaps from mice, to which she had great objection. My love was so much in my mind, and it was so natural to me to confide in Peggotty when I found her again by my side at an evening in the old set of industrial implements, busily making the tour of my wardrobe, that I imparted to her, in a sufficiently roundabout way, my great secret. Peggotty was strongly interested, but I could not get her into my view of the case at all. She was audaciously prejudiced in my favor, and quite unable to understand why I should have any misgivings or be low-spirited about it. So he really hasn't willingly told anyone about how he is in love with Dora. Few people, well, actually, just Mrs. Krupp, the landlady, has gotten some information from him about it because she just suspected something because he was acting very strangely. So Peggotty is really, I think maybe he told Mr. Micawber too. I don't remember. But Peggotty is the first one where he voluntarily told someone about this situation. And Peggotty, of course, thinks that Davy's the most wonderful person in the world. So she says, well, just, tell her, because who wouldn't want to be with you? All right. The young lady might think herself well off, she observed, to have such a beau. A beau means like a boyfriend, someone. It's not really used anymore in... I guess you could still use it if you wanted to, but it isn't common. That's a French word for beautiful, like beautiful boy. But in English, and maybe in French too, I don't know, it could mean like boyfriend or someone that you're going to marry, a boy you're going to marry. And as to her pa, she said, what did the gentleman expect, for gracious sake? I observed, however, that Mr. Spenlow's proctorial gown and stiff cravat took Peggotty down a little, and inspired her with a greater reverence for the man who was gradually becoming more and more etherealized in my eyes every day, and about whom a reflected radiance seemed to me to beam when he sat erect in court among his papers, like a little lighthouse in the sea of stationery. And by the by, it used to be uncommonly strange to me to consider, I remember, as I sat in court too, how those dim old judges and doctors wouldn't have cared for Dora if they had known her. How they wouldn't have gone out of their senses with rapture if marriage with Dora had been proposed to them. How Dora might have sung and play upon that glorified guitar until she led me to the verge of madness, yet not have tempted one of those slow goers an inch out of his road. I despised them to a man, frozen out old gardeners in the flower beds of the heart. I took a personal offense against them all. The bench was nothing to me, but an insensible blunderer. The bar had no more tenderness or poetry in it than the bar of a public house. Taking the management of Peggotty's affairs into my own hands with no little pride, I proved the will and came to a settlement with the Legacy Duty Office and took her to the bank and soon got everything into an orderly train. We varied the legal character of these proceedings by going to see some perspiring waxwork in Fleet Street, melted, I should hope, these 20 years, and by visiting Miss Linwood's exhibition, which I remember as a mausoleum of needlework, favorable to self-examination and repentance, and by inspecting the Tower of London and going to the top of St. Paul's. All these wonders afforded Peggotty as much pleasure as she was able to enjoy under existing circumstances, except, I think, St. Paul's, which from her long attachment to her work-box became a rival of the picture on the lid, and was in some particulars vanquished, she considered, by that work of art. Peggotty's business, which was what we used to call common form business in the Commons, and very light and lucrative the common form business was, being settled, I took her down to the office one morning to pay her bill. Mr. Spenlow had stepped out, old Tiffy said, to get a gentleman sworn for a marriage license. But as I knew, he would be back directly. Our place lying close to the surrogates and to the Vicar General's office too, I told Peggotty to wait. We were a little like undertakers in the Commons. An undertaker is a person whose business it is to take care of someone after they die. So an undertaker has to dress the dead body. An undertaker has to apply cosmetics to the face so that it looks nice when people say goodbye to the dead body. And I think also an undertaker will do the business of burying the body, putting the body into the ground. We were a little like undertakers in the Commons, as regarded probate transactions, generally making it a rule to look more or less cut up when we had to deal with clients in mourning. In a similar feeling of delicacy, we were always blithe and light-hearted with the licensed clients. Therefore, I hinted to Peggotty that she would find Mr. Spenlow much recovered from the shock of Mr. Barkis's decease, and indeed he came in like a bridegroom. But neither Peggotty nor I had eyes for him when we saw, in company with him, Mr. Murdstone. He was very little changed. His hair looked as thick, and was certainly as black as ever, and his glance was as little to be trusted as of old. "Ah, Copperfield," said Mr. Spenlow, "you know this gentleman, I believe?" I made my gentleman a distant bow. Bowing is like this. And Peggotty barely recognized him. He was, at first, somewhat disconcerted to meet us two together, but quickly decided what to do, and came up to me. "I hope," he said, "that you're doing well." "I can hardly be interesting to you," said I. "Yes, if you wish to know." "It can hardly be interesting to you," said I. "Yes, if you wish to know." We looked at each other, and he addressed himself to Peggotty. "And you?" he said. "I'm sorry to observe that you have lost your husband." "It's not the first loss I have had in my life, Mr. Murdstone," replied Peggotty, trembling from head to foot. So Mr. Murdstone was very cruel to Davy's mother when he was married to her. And Peggotty is convinced that his cruelty killed Davy's mother. So when she says, "It's not the first loss I've had in my life," she's saying she's including Davy's mother and implying that, she thinks that he killed her. "I'm glad to hope that there is nobody to blame for this one." So she's very direct about this. "Nobody to answer for it." "Ha!" said he. "That's a comfortable reflection. You have done your duty." "I have not worn anybody's life away," said Peggotty. "I am thankful to think. No, Mr. Murdstone, I have not worrited and frightened any sweet creature to an early grave." So she's very direct about this. She's saying, "No, my husband died of natural causes. I didn't give him stress until he died," which is what Mr. Murdstone did to Davy's mother. He eyed her. To eye someone is to go like this. He's looking at Peggotty. Gloomily, he eyed her gloomily, remorsefully, I thought, for an instant, and said, turning his head towards me, but looking at my feet instead of my face, "We are not likely to encounter soon again. A source of satisfaction to us both, no doubt. For such meetings as this can never be agreeable. I do not expect that you, who always rebelled against my just authority exerted for your benefit and reformation, should owe me any goodwill now. There is an antipathy between us." "An old one, I believe," I said, muttering, interrupting him. He smiled and shot an evil glance at me as could come from his dark eyes. "It rankled in your baby breast," he said. "It embittered the life of your poor mother. You're right. I hope that you may do better yet. I hope that you may correct yourself." Here he ended the dialogue, which had been carried on in a low voice in the corner of the outer office, by passing into Mr. Spenlow's room, and saying aloud in his smoothest manner, "Gentlemen of Mr. Spenlow's profession are accustomed to family differences, and know how complicated and difficult they always are." With that he paid the money for his license, and receiving it neatly folded from Mr. Spenlow, together with a shake of a hand and a polite wish for his happiness, and the ladies went out of the office. I might have had more difficulty in constraining myself to be silent under his words, if I had had less difficulty in impressing upon Peggotty, who was only angry on my account, good creature, that we were not in a place for recrimination, and that I besought her to hold her peace. She was so unusually roused that I was glad to compound for an affectionate hug, elicited by this revival in her mind of our old injuries, and to make the best of it I could before Mr. Spenlow and the clerks. So Peggotty's very upset at seeing Murdstone. She hates him. Davy hates him too. He's a horrible man. And they believe that he's responsible for the death of his mother. So they were very upset when Mr. Murdstone left, and they hugged each other, which kind of mellowed out the situation. Mr. Spenlow did not appear to know what the connection between Mr. Murdstone and myself was, which I was glad of, for I could not bear to acknowledge him, even in my own breast, remembering what I did of the history of my poor mother. Mr. Spenlow seemed to think, if he thought anything about the matter, that my aunt was the leader of the state party in our family, and that there was a rebel party commanded by somebody else. So I gathered, at least, from what he had said while we were waiting for Mr. Tiffy to make out Peggotty's bill of costs. Miss Trotwood, he remarked, is very, very firm, no doubt, and not likely to give way to opposition. I have an admiration for her character. I may congratulate you, Copperfield, on being on the right side. Differences between relations are much to be deplored, but they're extremely general, and the great thing is to be on the right side, meaning I take it on the side of the moneyed interest. Rather a good marriage, this, I believe, said Mr. Spenlow. I explained that I knew nothing about it. Indeed, he said, speaking from a few words Mr. Murdstone dropped, as a man frequently does on these occasions, and from what Miss Murdstone let fall, I should say it was a rather good marriage. Do you mean that there is money, sir? I asked. Yes, said Mr. Spenlow. I understand there's money. Beauty, too, I'm told. So Mr. Murdstone is getting married again to another young lady for money. Indeed. Is his new wife young? Just of age, said Mr. Spenlow, so lately that I should think that they had been waiting for that. To be of age means to be the appropriate age for something. So I'm not sure what they consider to be the appropriate age for marriage in 1840s England. But maybe could be 16, could be 18, could be 20. I'm not really sure. But to be of age means to be the appropriate age for the marriage. Lord deliver her, said Peggotty, so very emphatically, and unexpectedly that we were all three discomposed until Tiffy came in with the bill. Old Tiffy soon appeared, however, and handed it to Mr. Spenlow to look over. To look something over it's a phrasal verb, and it means to review something. Mr. Spenlow, settling his chin in his cravat and rubbing it softly, went over the items with a deprecatory air. Cravat is a tie. That's another word for tie. As if it were all Jorkin's doing, and handed it back to Tiffy with a bland sigh. Yes, he said, that's right, quite right. I should have been extremely happy, Copperfield, to have limited these charges to the actual expenditure out of pocket. But it is an irksome incident in my professional life that I am not at liberty to consult my own wishes, as I have a partner, Mr. Jorkins. To be irked is to be annoyed. So if something is irksome, that means it's annoying. So it's annoying. Something about my professional life is irksome. Something about my professional life is annoying. I get these two guys mixed up. There's Mr. Jorkum, Mr. Jorkins, and Mr. Spenlow. Mr. Spenlow is always blaming Mr. Jorkins for anything. So if you ask Mr. Spenlow something, he says, "Oh, I would love to, but Mr. Jorkins, my partner, says no." And here he says, "I would like to I would like to give you a discount," but then Mr. Jorkins would be very angry. So it's called good cop, bad cop. And Mr. Spenlow is the good cop, and Mr. Jorkins is the bad cop. As he said this, with his gentle melancholy, which was the next thing to making no charge at all, I expressed my acknowledgments on Peggotty's behalf, and paid Tiffy in banknotes. Peggotty then retired to her lodging, and Mr. Spenlow and I went into court, where we had a divorce suit coming on, under an ingenious little statute, repealed now, I believe, but in virtue of which I have seen several marriages annulled, of which the merits were these. A statute is like a law. It's very similar to a law. Let's see. He's going to tell us what the husband, whose name was Thomas Benjamin, had taken out his marriage license as Thomas only, suppressing the Benjamin, in case he should not find himself as comfortable as expected. So this guy got married, and he didn't put his complete name on the license. And this way, if he decides he doesn't want to be married anymore, it would be very easy to get a divorce. He could say, "Oh, look, they made a mistake on the license." Not finding himself as comfortable as he expected, or being a little fatigued with his wife, poor fellow, he now came forward by a friend after being married a year or two, and declared that his name was Thomas Benjamin, and therefore he was not married at all, which the court confirmed to his great satisfaction. I must say, I had my doubts about the strict justice of this, and was not even frightened out of them by the bushel of wheat, which reconciles all anomalies. But Mr. Spenlow argued that the matter with me, and he said, "Look at the world. There was good and there was evil in that. Look at the ecclesiastical law. There was good and evil in that. It was all part of a system very good. There you were." I had not the hardihood to suggest to Dora's father that possibly we might even improve the world a little, if we got up early in the morning and took off our coats to work, but I confessed that I thought we might improve the commons. Mr. Spenlow replied that he would particularly advise me to dismiss the idea from my mind as not being worthy of my gentlemanly character, but that he would be glad to hear from me of what improvement I thought the commons susceptible. So Davy is saying, well, maybe we could do something to make it better a little bit. And his boss is saying, "Oh, don't even think about that." But then he's saying, "What is it? What do you think we could improve?" Taking that part of the commons which happened to be nearest to us, for our man was unmarried by this time, as we were out of court, and strolling past the prerogative office, I submitted that I thought the prerogative office rather a queerly managed institution. Mr. Spenlow inquired in what respect, and I replied with all due deference to his experience, but with more deference, I'm afraid, to his being Dora's father, that perhaps it was a little nonsensical that the registry of that court, containing the original wills of all persons leaving effects within the immense province of Canterbury for 3 whole centuries, should be an accidental building, never designed for the purpose, leased by the registrars for their own private emolument, unsafe, not even ascertained to be fireproof. Choked, with important documents it held, and positively from roof to basement a mercenary speculation of the registrars, who took great fees from the public and crammed the public's wills away anyhow and anywhere, having no other object than to get rid of them cheaply. So Davy is saying this office that holds the wills of people. Uh-oh, I've gone blurry. Okay. It's bad to keep the records in this building. That building was not meant to hold such important documents. They don't even know if it's fireproof. If something is fireproof, that means that it can't catch fire. So, if you have something waterproof, that means you won't get wet. The water won't penetrate it. So if it's raining, you have to wear a waterproof jacket. If you have important documents, you probably want to put it in a fireproof box. Meaning if there's a fire, nothing will happen. The documents will be safe. And so Davy is saying that this is a horrible place to store these documents because the building was never intended for this purpose, and it's very unsafe. That perhaps it was a little unreasonable that these registrars, in the receipt of profits amounting to £8,000 or £9,000 a year, to say nothing of the profits of the deputy registrars and the clerks of the seats, should not be obliged to spend a little of that money in finding a reasonable, safe place for the important documents which all classes of people were compelled to hand over to them, whether they would or no. That, perhaps, was a little unjust, that all the great offices in this great office should be magnificent sinecures. We've had that word before, sinecure, but I don't remember what it means. It's not a common word. Let's look it up again. Sinecure. A position requiring little or no work, but giving the holder status or financial benefit. While the unfortunate working clerks in the cold, dark room upstairs were the worst rewarded and the least considered men, doing important services in London, that perhaps it was a little indecent that the principal registrar of all, whose duty it was to find the public constantly resorting to this place all needful accommodation, should be an enormous sinecurist in virtue of that post, and might be besides a clergyman, a pluralist, a holder of a staff in a cathedral, and what not. While the public was put to inconvenience, of which we had a specimen every afternoon when the office was busy, and which we knew to be quite monstrous, that perhaps, in short, this prerogative, what does that word mean? Prerogative. An exclusive right or privilege, exercised by virtue of rank, office, or the like, prerogatives of a senator, the right or privilege limited to a specific person of a particular category. That perhaps this prerogative office of the Diocese of Canterbury was altogether such a pestilent job, and such a pernicious absurdity, that but for its being squeezed away in a corner of St. Paul's churchyard, which few people knew, it must have been turned away completely inside out and upside down long ago. Mr. Spenlow smiled, and I became modestly warm on the subject, and then he argued this question with me as he had argued the other. He said, "What was it, after all?" It was a question of feeling. If the public felt that their wills were in safe keeping, and took it for granted that the office was not to be made better, who was the worse for it? Nobody. Who was the better for it? All the sinecurists. Very well. Then the good predominated. It might not be a perfect system. Nothing was perfect. But what he objected to was the insertion of the wedge under the prerogative office. The country had been glorious. Insert the wedge into the prerogative office, and the country would cease to be glorious. He considered that, there's an expression, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And I think that's what he's saying. He's saying it works. Maybe it's not perfect, but it works, and nobody really complains about it. So leave it alone. And the expression is, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. That's kind of the same thing I think he's saying. He considered it the principle of a gentleman to take things as he found them, and he had no doubt that the prerogative office would last our time. I deferred to his opinion. Though I had great doubts of it myself, I found he was right, however, for it has not only lasted to the present moment, but has done so in teeth of great parliamentary report made, not too willingly, 18 years ago, when all these objections of mine were set forth in detail, and when the existing stowage for wills was described as equal to the accumulation of only 2 years and a half more. What they have done with them since, whether they have lost many or whether they sell any now and then to the butter shops, I don't know. I'm glad mine is not there. I hope it may not go there yet a while. I have set all this down in my present blissful chapter because here it comes into its natural place. Mr. Spenlow and I, falling into this conversation, prolonged it, and our saunter to and fro, until we diverged into general topics, and so it came about in the end that Mr. Spenlow told me this day was Dora's birthday, and he would be glad if I would come down and join a little picnic on the occasion. I went out of my senses immediately, became a mere driveller the next day, on receipt of a little lace-edged sheet of notepaper, favored by Papa to remind and pass the intervening period in a state of dotage. I think I committed every possible absurdity in the way of preparation for this blessed event. I turn hot when I remember the cravat I bought. My boots might be placed in any collection of instruments of torture. I provided and sent down by the Norwood coach the night before a delicate little hamper amounting in itself, I thought, almost to a declaration. There were crackers in it, and the tenderest mottos that could be got for money. What is that, mottos? Let's see. M-O-T-T-O-E-S. Oh. Let's try. Well, Google doesn't have a definition. Well, let me ask ChatGPT. It must be some kind of food or something. Oh, well, the word motto is like a phrase, motto, is like a phrase that represents an organization or a family or something like that. But I don't think that's what's meant here. I think it's something else. But Google doesn't seem to know, and ChatGPT doesn't seem to know what this is. Let's read it again. See, he says there were crackers in it with the tenderest mottos that could be got for money. That doesn't make any sense. Crackers are, it's like hard bread, crunchy bread. But I don't know. I don't know why they're saying mottos here. I guess we just have to move on. At 6 in the morning, I was in Covent Garden Market buying a bouquet for Dora. Bouquet is like a collection of flowers. So when he says buying a bouquet, he means buying a collection, like a different mix of flowers for Dora. And then at 10 I was on horseback. I hired a gallant grey for the occasion, with the bouquet in my hat to keep it fresh, trotting down to Norwood. I suppose that when I saw Dora in the garden and pretended not to see her and rode past the house pretending to be anxiously looking for it, I committed two small fooleries which other young gentlemen in my circumstances might have committed, because they came so very natural to me. But oh, when I did find the house, and did dismount at the garden gate, and drag those stony-hearted boots across the lawn to Dora, sitting in the garden seat, under a lilac tree, with a spectacle, what a spectacle she was! In a white chip bonnet and a dress of celestial blue. There was a young lady with her, comparatively stricken in years, almost 20, I should say. Her name was Miss Mills, and Dora called her Julia. She was the bosom friend of Dora. Happy Miss Mills. Remember, bosom is this area here. This is your bosom. A bosom friend means like a very, very close friend. Best friends. Besties. BFFs. Jip was there, and Jip would bark at me again. When I presented my bouquet, he gnashed his teeth with jealousy. Well, he might. If he had the least idea how I adored his mistress, well, he might. "Oh, thank you, Mr. Copperfield. What dear flowers," said Dora. I had an intention of saying, and had been studying the best form of words for 3 miles, that I thought them beautiful before I saw them so near her. But I couldn't manage it. She was too bewildering. So Davy, he's riding his horse to her house, and all the time he's thinking, what am I going to say? He's planning the exact words, and he finds the perfect words to say to her. But now that he's there with her, he forgot. He couldn't say what they were. To see her lay the flowers against her little dimpled chin was to lose all presence of mind and power of language in a feeble ecstasy. I wonder I didn't say, "Kill me if you have a heart, Miss Mills. Let me die here." Then Dora held my flowers to Jip to smell. Then Jip growled and wouldn't smell them. Then Dora laughed and held them a little closer to Jip to make him. Then Jip laid hold of a bit of geranium with his teeth, and worried imaginary cats within it. Then Dora beat him and pouted and said, "My poor beautiful flowers," as compassionately, I thought, as if Jip had laid hold of me. I wish he had. "You'll be so glad to hear, Mr. Copperfield," said Dora, that cross Miss Murdstone is not here. She has gone to her brother's marriage and will be away at least 3 weeks. Isn't that delightful? Ikram says, "Thank you very much." Well, thank you for coming and watching, Ikram. If you have questions, please ask as we go. I'll be happy to answer them. I said I was sure it must be delightful to her, and that all that was delightful to her was delightful to me. Miss Mills, with an air of superior wisdom and benevolence, smiled upon us. She is the most disagreeable thing I ever saw, said Dora. You can't believe how ill-tempered and shocking she is, Julia. Yes, I can, my dear, said Julia. You can, perhaps, love, returned Dora, with her hand on Julia's. Forgive my not accepting you, my dear, at first. I learned from this that Miss Mills had had her trials in the course of a checkered existence, and that to these, perhaps, I might refer that wise benignity of her manner, which I had already noticed. I found, in the course of the day, that this was the case. Miss Mills, having been unhappy in a misplaced affection, being understood to have retired from the world on her awful stock of experience, but still to take a calm interest in the unblighted hopes and loves of youth. But now Mr. Spenlow came out of the house, and Dora went to him, saying, Look, Papa, what beautiful flowers! And Miss Mills smiled thoughtfully, as who should say, Ye Mayflies, enjoy your brief existence in the bright morning of life. And we all walked the lawn towards the carriage, which was getting ready. I shall never have such a ride again. I have never had such another. There were only those three, their hamper, my hamper, the guitar case, in the phaeton. And of course, the phaeton was open, and I rode behind it, and Dora sat with her back to the horses, looking towards me. She kept the bouquet close to her on the cushion, and wouldn't allow Jip to sit on that side of her at all, for fear he would crush it. Just a second. Okay. Sorry about that. My dog moved and then the computer screen went blank. Okay, she often carried it in her hand, often refreshed herself with its fragrance. Our eyes at those times often met. And my great astonishment is that I didn't go over the head of my gallant grey into the carriage. There was dust, I believe. There was a good deal of dust, I believe. I have a faint impression that Mr. Spenlow remonstrated me for riding in it, but I knew of none. I was sensible of a mist of love and beauty about Dora, but of nothing else. He stood up sometimes and asked me what I thought of the prospect. I said it was delightful. The prospect is like the view. What do you think of the view? And I dare say it was. But it was all Dora to me. The sun shone. The sun shone Dora, and the birds sang Dora, and the south wind blew Dora, and my wild flowers in the hedges were all Dora to a bud. My comfort is, Miss Mills understood me. Miss Mills alone could enter into my feelings thoroughly. So her friend Julia understood. Maybe Dora doesn't notice or understand yet, but her friend Julia, it's very obvious to her that Davy is in love with Dora. I don't know how long we were going, and to this hour I know as little where we went. Perhaps it was near Guildford. Perhaps some Arabian Night magician opened up the place for the day and shut it up forever when we came away. It was a green spot on a hill, carpeted with soft turf. There were shady trees, heather as far as the eye could see, a rich landscape. It was a trying thing to find people here waiting for us, and my jealousy, even of the ladies, knew no bounds. but all of my own sex, especially one impostor 3 or 4 years my elder, with a red whisker on which he established an amount of presumption not to be endured, were my mortal foes. So Davy was disappointed when they arrived at their destination to find all of these people here, because he was hoping to have an intimate time with Dora. And so it really bothered him to see people there preparing for their breakfast, or preparing for their picnic, or preparing for their party. We all unpacked our baskets and employed ourselves in getting dinner ready. Red Whisker pretended he could make a salad, which I don't believe, and obtruded himself on public notice. Some of the young ladies washed the lettuces for him and sliced them under his direction. Dora was among these. I felt that fate had pitied me against this man, and one of us must fall. So there's one red-headed person who Davy is calling Red Whiskers. Whiskers are, this is your hair, but if you have a beard or a mustache, those are whiskers. So he's calling him Red Whiskers. Maybe he doesn't have a mustache or a beard, but at that time it was the style to have sideburns. So you would grow your hair all the way down like this. And these are sideburns. And I think when he calls him Red Whiskers, he's talking about right here. But he's saying he's very jealous of this man. I guess they're about the same age, and he wants to kill him. Because he's so in love with Dora, he's afraid that maybe he will take Dora away from him. Red Whisker made his salad. I wondered how they could eat it. Nothing should have induced me to touch it, so Davy won't eat the salad that he made, because he hates him. And voted himself into the charge of the wine cellar, which he constructed, being an ingenious beast, in the hollow trunk of a tree. By and by I saw him with the majority of a lobster on his plate, eating his dinner at the feet of Dora. I had but an indistinct idea of what happened for some time after this baleful object presented itself in my view. I was very merry, I know, but it was a hollow merriment. If something is hollow, that means there's nothing inside of it. So it's just the outside part, and there's nothing inside. So he was acting happy, but it was a hollow happy. So really, he didn't feel happy on the inside. I attached myself to a young creature in pink, with little eyes, and flirted with her desperately. She received my attentions with favor. But whether on my account solely, or because she had any designs on Red Whisker, I can't say. Dora's health was drunk, and when I drank it, I affected to interrupt my conversation for that purpose, and to resume it immediately afterwards. I caught Dora's eye and bowed to her, and thought it looked appealing, but it looked at me over the head of Red Whisker, and I was adamant. All right, so Davy is flirting with another girl. Flirting is when you try to show like a love interest with someone. So flirting is like, hi, how are you doing? I can't flirt. But that's, it's kind of talking to someone or acting in a certain way to show that you're interested in them. So he's flirting with this girl, I think to make Dora jealous, to see how she reacts to that. The young creature in pink, that's the girl he's flirting with. The young creature in pink had a mother in green, and I rather think the latter separated us from motives of policy. Howbeit, there was a general breaking up of the party, while the remnants of the dinner were being put away, and I strolled off by myself among the trees in a raging and remorseful state. I was debating whether I should pretend that I was not well and fly. I don't know where, upon my gallant grey, when Dora and Miss Mills met me. So Davy was thinking about, I think that Red Whiskers was spending a lot of time with Dora, which upset Davy. And now he wasn't so happy, and he wanted to leave the party. So he was thinking about saying, "Oh, I don't really feel so well. I think I have to go." But just as he was about to do this, Dora and Miss Mills came over to him. "Mr. Copperfield," said Miss Mills, "you are dull. Dull means boring." So he's acting boring. I begged her pardon. Not at all." "And Dora," said Miss Mills, "you are dull." "Oh dear, no, not in the least." "Mr. Copperfield and Dora," said Miss Mills with an almost venerable air, "enough of this. Do not allow a trivial misunderstanding to wither the blossoms of spring, which once put forth and blighted cannot be renewed. I speak," said Miss Mills, "from experience of the past, the remote, irrevocable past. The gushing fountains which sparkle in the sun must not be stopped in mere caprice. The oasis in the desert of the Sahara must not be plucked up idly." So Miss Mills is saying, there's some kind of misunderstanding here, probably because of Red Whiskers. And Davy was angry that she was spending time with him and wanted to forget the whole thing and leave. And Miss Mills is saying, "Oh, don't let this little misunderstanding prevent something good from happening." And I know from experience, because that happened to me. "I hardly knew what I did. I was burning all over to that extraordinary extent. But I took Dora's little hand, and I kissed it, and she let me. I kissed Miss Mills' hand, and we all seemed, to my thinking, to go straight up to the seventh heaven." Oh, Ikram is saying, maybe you could also make some insightful observations over those sentences or expressions that carry a kind of ambiguity, like you're doing now with single words. If you have a question about a sentence which doesn't seem clear, can you ask me to explain it to you? Because the language here is very complicated, so it's better if we just stop sometimes. And because if we tried to stop and explain every single sentence, it would be very difficult. But when you're very curious about something, why don't you ask about it? I kissed Miss Mill's hand, and we all seemed, to my thinking, to go straight up to seventh heaven. We did not come down again. We stayed up. We stayed up there all the evening. At first we strayed to and fro among the trees, with Dora's shy arm drawn through mine, and heaven knows, folly as it all was, it would have been a happy fate to have been struck immortal with those foolish feelings and have stayed among the trees forever. But much too soon we heard the others laughing and talking and calling, "Where's Dora?" So we went back, and they wanted Dora to sing. Red Whisker would have got the guitar case out of the carriage, but Dora told him that nobody knew where it was but I. So Red Whisker was done for in a moment. To be done for means it's finished. If you say, "I'm done for," that means I'm finished, and that's bad. This is a bad finish. This is not a good finish, like I finished my project, I finished my homework. This is done for. It almost means like I'm dead, I'm gone, I'm completely gone. So Red Whiskers was done for in a moment. So with that comment, don't get my case, only Davy knows where my case is. That was a clear sign, no more Red Whisker for her. And I got it. I unlocked it. And I took the guitar out and sat by her. And I held her handkerchief and gloves, and I drank in every note of her dear voice as she sang to me, who loved her. And all the others might applaud as much as they liked, but they had nothing to do with it. I was intoxicated with joy. Intoxicated means drunk. I was drunk with joy. I was afraid it was too happy to be real, and that I should wake up in Buckingham Street presently and hear Mrs. Krupp clinking the teacups. Remember clinking, I don't have two glasses today. I don't have anything to clink. That's a clink. Mrs. Krupp clinking the teacups and getting breakfast ready. So Davy's thinking, I'm going to wake up in my apartment like it was all a dream. But Dora sang, and the others sang, and Miss Mills sang about the slumbering echoes and the caverns of memory, as if she were 100 years old. And the evening came on. We had tea, with the kettle boiling, gypsy fashion. And I was still as happy as ever. I was happier than ever when the party broke up and the other people, defeated Red Whisker and all, went their several ways, and we went ours through the still evening and the dying light, with sweet scents rising up around us, Mr. Spenlow being a little drowsy after the champagne. Honor to the soil that grew the grape, to the grape that made the wine, to the sun that ripened it, to the merchant who adulterated it. And being fast asleep in the corner of the carriage, I rode by the side and talked to Dora. She admired my horse and patted him. Oh, what a dear little hand it looked upon the horse. And her shawl would not keep right, and now and then I drew it round with my arm, and I even fancied that Jip began to see how it was, and to understand that he must make up his mind and be friends with me. That sagacious Miss Mills, too. What is sagacious? Let's see. I think we've had this word before, but I forget what it means. Sagacious. Good judgment, having good judgment. That sagacious Miss Mills. So Miss Mills, because Miss Mills understood what was happening between Dora and Davy, so she has good judgment. She can see things very clearly. She brought them together. That sagacious Miss Mills, too. That amiable means likable or friendly. That amiable, though quite used up, recluse. A recluse is a person who doesn't like to be around other people, who likes to stay alone. That little patriarch of something less than 20, who had done with the world, and mustn't on any account have the slumbering echoes in the caverns of memory awakened. What a kind thing she did. So, Miss Mills was in love with someone. I don't know what happened. They just mention it a little bit. She was in love with something bad happened. She was in love and then her heart was broken. And now she doesn't want anything to do with love, even though she's very young. She's only 20. But she could still see what was happening between Dora and Davy, so she brought them together. And so Davy's thinking, that's wonderful that she's in such a bad place in her heart because her heart was broken, but she still had the kindness to bring them together. Mr. Copperfield, said Miss Mills, come to this side of the carriage a moment, if you can spare a moment. I want to speak to you. Behold me. Behold means look. Behold. Look at me, behold me on my gallant gray, bending at the side of Miss Mills, with my hand upon the carriage door. Dora is coming to stay with me. She's coming home with me the day after tomorrow. If you would like to call, I'm sure Papa would be happy to see you. What could I do but invoke a silent blessing on Miss Mill's head, and store Miss Mill's address in the securest corner of my memory? What could I do but tell Miss Mills with grateful looks and fervent words how much I appreciated her good offices, and what an inestimable value I set upon her friendship. Then Miss Mills benignantly, let's see, how do you pronounce that? Benign means good. Okay, but this is benignant. Let's see. I think it's benignant. This is not a word that you need to know. You'll never use it in your life. I've never used this word. Benignant. Benignantly. Okay. So when you see that word bene, which is a Latin word, which means good, that means something good. So then Miss Mills benignantly dismissed me. So she told me, okay, you can go, but she said it in a very nice way. Go back to Dora. And I went, and Dora leaned out of the carriage to talk to me, and we talked all the rest of the way. And I rode my gallant gray so close to the wheel that I grazed his near foreleg against it, and took the bark off of his owner, as his owner told me, to the tune of 3 pund 7, which I paid, and thought extremely cheap for so much joy. So he was getting so close to Dora. Dora's in a carriage, and he's on a horse, and he was getting so close that he actually hurt the horse. The horse got hurt, and he had to pay. He just rented the horse, and he had to pay money for compensation for hurting the horse. What time Miss Mills sat looking at the moon, murmuring verses, and recalling, I suppose, the ancient days when she and earth had anything in common. Norwood was many, many miles too near, and we reached it many hours too soon. But Mr. Spenlow came to himself. That means he woke up. He got a little drunk because he was drinking champagne during the picnic. So when someone comes to, that means it really kind of means waking up. But usually because you fainted or passed out or you drank too much and you didn't really go to sleep. Mr. Spenlow came to himself a little short of it and said, "You must come in, Copperfield, and rest." And I consenting, we had sandwiches and wine and water in the light room. Dora, blushing, looked so lovely that I could not tear myself away from her, but sat there staring in a dream until the snoring of Mr. Spenlow inspired me with sufficient consciousness to take my leave. So when Mr. Spenlow was snoring, he could hear it, and he thought, oh, it's time to go. I have to go. So we parted, I riding all the way to London with the farewell touch of Dora's hand still light on mine, recalling every incident and word 10,000 times, lying down in my own bed at last, and enraptured. A young noodle, as ever, was carried out of his 5 wits by love. When I awoke the next morning, I was resolute. That means I made a decision to declare my passion to Dora and know my fate. Happiness or misery was now the question. There was no other question that I knew of in the world, and only Dora could give the answer to it. I passed 3 days in a luxury of wretchedness, torturing myself by putting every conceivable variety of discouraging construction on all that ever had taken place between Dora and me. At last arrayed for the purpose of a vast expense, I went to Miss Mills, fraught with a declaration. How many times I went up and down the street and round the square, painfully aware of being a much better answer to the old riddle than the original one, before I could persuade myself to go up to the steps and knock. So Davy, he's decided, I'm going to tell Dora that I'm in love with her and I want to marry her. And now he's going to Miss Mills' house. And he's so nervous, he's just walking up and down the street. He's trying to find the courage to knock on the door. Ikram says, can I use take my leave to in informal conversations? It's a very formal expression, and I think it's kind of old-fashioned. I don't know if people really say that much anymore. So I would just say goodbye, or get ready to say goodbye, or something like that. It just seems not just formal, but kind of old-fashioned to say that. Before I could persuade myself to go up the steps and knock is no matter now. Even when at last I had knocked and was waiting at the door, I had some flurried thought of asking if that were Mr. Blackboy's, an imitation of poor Barkis, begging pardon and retreating, but I kept my ground. Wait a minute, what? Even at last, when I had knocked and was waiting at the door, I had some flurried thought of asking if that were Mr. Blackboy's, an imitation of poor Mr. Barkis. Oh, well, I think Davy is saying, after he knocked, he was thinking, oh my gosh, I can't do this. Maybe when the person answers, I'll just ask for someone who isn't really there. And when they say no, I'll go away. But I kept my ground. Mr. Mills was not at home, and I did not expect that he would be. Nobody wanted him. Miss Mills was at home. Miss Mills would do. I was shown into a room upstairs where Miss Mills and Dora were. Jip was there. Miss Mills was copying music, I recollect. It was a new song called Affection's Dirge. And Dora was painting flowers. What were my feelings when I recognized my own flowers? So Dora was painting a picture of flowers, but actually they were the flowers. She was painting a picture of the flowers that Davy had given her a few days earlier. What were my feelings when I recognized my own flowers, the identical Covent Garden Market purchase? I cannot say that they were very like, or that they particularly resembled any flowers that have ever come under my observation. But I knew from the paper around them, which was accurately copied, what the composition was. Miss Mills was very glad to see me, and very sorry her papa was not at home, though I thought we all bore that with fortitude. Miss Mills was conversational for a few minutes, and then laying down her pen upon Affection's Dirge, got up and left the room. I began to think I would put it off until tomorrow. Now, put off is a phrasal verb which means to delay something. So Davy wants to confess his love to Dora, and now he's thinking, I'll put it off until tomorrow. I'll delay it until tomorrow. I hope your poor Horace was not tired when you got home at night, said Dora, lifting up her beautiful eyes. It was a long way for him. I began to think I would do it today. It was a long way for him, said I, for he had nothing to uphold him on the journey. Wasn't he fed, poor thing? Asked Dora. I began to think I would put it off until tomorrow again. Yes, I said. He was well taken care of. I mean, he had not the unutterable happiness that I had being so near you. So Dora's saying, I hope your horse wasn't tired after that long trip you took to come and see me. And the horse says, oh, he's okay. Not like me, who had the wonderful experience of seeing you. He couldn't possibly be as happy as me. Delay, Ikram is asking, delay is like postpone. Yes, delay, postpone, put off, they all mean the same thing. To make something happen at a later time. Dora bent her head over her drawing and said, after a little while, I had sat. Wait, what? Dora bent her head over her drawing and said, after a little while, I had sat in the interval in a burning fever and with my legs in a very rigid state. You didn't seem to be sensible of that happiness yourself at one time of the day. So Dora's saying, so you think that it's wonderful to be around me, but I remember when you were flirting with that girl, it didn't seem like you were so interested at that time. I saw now that I was in for it. Okay, to be in for it means to be in trouble. So if you say you're in for it, that means you're in trouble. So I saw now that I was in for it. I saw now that I was in trouble. I saw now that I was in for it, and it must be done on the spot. You didn't care for that happiness in the least, said Dora, slightly raising her eyebrows and shaking her head, when you were sitting by Miss Kit. Kit, I should observe, was the name of the creature in the pink with the little eyes. Though certainly I don't know why you should, said Dora, or why you should call it a happiness at all. But of course you don't mean what you say, and I'm sure no one doubts your being at liberty to do whatever you like. Jip, you naughty boy, come here. I don't know how I did it. I did it in a moment. I intercepted Jip. I had Dora in my arms. I was full of eloquence. To be eloquent means to express yourself in the best, most beautiful possible way. I never stopped for a word. I told her how I loved her. I told her I should die without her. I told her that I idolized her, worshipped her. Jip barked madly all the time. When Dora hung her head and cried and trembled, my eloquence increased so much the more. If she would like me to die for her, she had but to say the word, and I was ready. Life without Dora's love was not a thing was not a thing to have on any terms. I couldn't bear it, and I wouldn't. I had loved her every minute, day and night, since the first I saw her. I loved her at that minute to distraction. I should always love her, every minute to distraction. Lovers had loved before, and lovers would love again, but no lover had loved, might, could, would, or should ever love as I loved Dora. The more I raved, the more Jip barked. Each of us, in his own way, got more mad every moment. Well, that's funny because mad can mean two things. It can mean crazy and it can mean angry. So Jip hates everybody but Dora, so he's angry. And Davy is going crazy. He's saying everything. He's spilling the beans, which means telling all of his secrets. And he's going crazy. So that's funny. They're both going mad, but in different ways. Well, well, Dora and I, sitting on the sofa by and by, quiet enough, and Jip was lying in her lap, winking peacefully at me. It was off my mind. I was in a state of perfect rapture. Dora and I were engaged. I suppose we had some notion that this was to end in marriage. We must have had some, because Dora stipulated that we were never to be married without her papa's consent. But in our youthful ecstasy, I don't think that we really looked before us or behind us, or had any aspiration beyond the ignorant present. By the way, her father will never say yes, because she's extremely rich. And Davy's not poor, but he's not at their level. There's no way that her father would ever agree to let them be married. But in our youthful ecstasy, I don't think that we really looked before us or behind us, or had any aspiration beyond the ignorant present. We were to keep our secret from Mr. Spenlow, but I am sure the idea never entered my head then that there was anything dishonorable in that. This is a very bad thing that they're doing. So they've made this agreement to be married without the father's permission. And if he ever discovers that, number one, he'll never say yes because Davy isn't rich like him. But also, the fact that they made this agreement in secret without consulting him is a huge insult. Miss Mills was more than usually pensive. Being pensive means to be thinking about something. So Miss Mills was unusually very deep in thought when Dora, going to find her, brought her back. I apprehend because there was a tendency in what had passed to awaken that slumbering echoes in the caverns of her memory. So Davy thinks that she was pensive, like obviously she was thinking about something. And Davy thought, oh, she's probably remembering this heartbreak that she had. But she gave us her blessing and the assurance of her lasting friendship, and spoke to us generally as became a voice from the cloister. What an idle time it was! What an insubstantial, happy, foolish time it was when I measured Dora's finger for the ring that was to be made of forget-me-nots. Forget-me-nots are a type of flower. And when the jeweler, to whom I took the measure, found me out and laughed over his order book and charged me anything he liked for a pretty little toy with its blue stones so associated with my remembrance of Dora's hand. So he took some flowers or some part of a flower, and he wrapped that around her finger to measure her finger for their wedding ring. But when he took that to the place that makes wedding rings, the jeweler laughed and probably overcharged him for something that wasn't very valuable. So associated my remembrance with Dora's hand that yesterday, when I saw such another by chance on the finger of my own daughter, there was a momentary stirring in my heart like pain. When I walked about, exalted with my secret, and full of my own interest, and felt the dignity of loving Dora, and of being beloved, so much, that if I had walked the air, I could not have seen more above the people not so situated, who were creeping on the earth. When we had those meetings in the garden of the square, and sat within the dingy summer house, so happy, that I love the London sparrows to this hour for nothing else than to see the plumage of the tropics in their smoky feathers. When we had our first great quarrel, a quarrel is a fight, within a week of our betrothal. Betrothal means the process of getting married. And when Dora sent me back the ring, enclosed in a despairing cocked hat note, wherein she used the terrible expression that our love had begun in folly and ended in madness, which dreadful words occasioned me to tear my hair and cry that all was over, when, under cover of night, I flew to Miss Mills, whom I saw by stealth in the back kitchen. Stealth means like secret, undetected. To interpose between us and avert insanity, when Miss Mills undertook the office and returned with Dora, exhorting us, from the pulpit of her own bitter youth, to mutual concession and the avoidance of the desert of Sahara. When we cried and made it up and were so blessed again. In that back kitchen, mangle and all, changed to love's own temple, where we arranged a plan of correspondence through Miss Mills, always to comprehend at least one letter on each side every day. What an idle time! What an insubstantial, happy, foolish time! Of all the times of mine, that time has in his grip. There was none that in retrospect I can smile at half so much and think so tenderly. Okay, well, that is the end of chapter 33 of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens. Thank you for everyone who came and watched and asked questions. I really appreciate it. And I hope you come back when we read chapter 34, My Aunt Astonishes Me. That will probably be tomorrow at around the same time as today. So I hope to see you then. Thank you and goodbye.